Hey everybody, I decided to make a video for the Unit 1 FRQ, and I kind of combined the question with my work and my solution, and then also the scoring guidelines. So this is currently Tuesday. I'm going to grade your FRQs tomorrow morning, so you'll kind of see how you got your score based on the scoring key that's attached. So here's Unit 1 FRQ. I'll just give you kind of the gist of the problem. Actually, I'm gonna read it and kind of show you. Typically, if we were practicing for the AP exam, I would have you underline key information in the paragraph. Since you can't really do that online, I'll show you all my work that's not part of the answer. So when I started reading, I said the goal of a nutritional study was to compare the caloric intake of adolescents living in rural areas in the United States with caloric intake of adolescents living in urban areas of the United States. A random sample of 9th graders from one high school in a rural area was selected, and then another random sample from another high school, sorry, I'm using my fingers, was selected. Each student in the sample kept records of all food he or she consumed in one day. A back-to-back stem plot displays the number of calories of food consumed per kilogram of body weight. I'm going to underline that also because that's important. If you read the paragraph, I was expecting to see total calories in this stem and leaf plot, but it's not total calories. It's calories per kilogram of body weight. So let's say I consume 1,500 calories a day and I weigh 150 pounds, just to make this calculation kind of easy. My information on here would be a 10. So that's where these numbers in the stem and leaf plot are coming from. I eat a lot more than that. All right, so instead of underlining, because you can't really underline that on the AP exam in the format it's going to be this year, notice the things I wrote down. So everything right here is not even to part A yet. It's not part of my solution. Well, I mean, I read A, B, and C first just to see what I was going to be asked to find. But this is all information I got that's not part of my response that I'm going to submit via AP. So I made sure to say I had a sample of urban and rural 9th graders, so 2 samples. I should have really mentioned it's from one school, from one urban school, one rural school. And the data is calories per kilogram of body weight. I kind of stressed before we went on this coronacation that you need to include in context in your description of data. So in context here, you'd need to mention the units are calories per kilogram of body weight. All right, well then I read part A. So part A said, write a few sentences comparing the distribution of daily caloric intake of the rural school with the urban school. So we know describing distributions that shape, center, and spread. So I went back to my data, and first of all, I looked at their shapes. So if you notice, the urban school is definitely skewed. You just got to be careful with the direction here because it's going from, because it's a back-to-back, 2 to 5. If I were to draw this on a regular X and Y axis, 2 would be here and 5 would be somewhere up here. So the skew really, oops, I'm backwards, hold on. The skew, the 5 is where the tail would be, and the 2 is where the hump would be. So the skew is to the right. So keep that in mind on these back-to-backs. They might try to trick you. And then the rural, I see, is pretty symmetric, almost uniform. So my shapes for urban, I said, was skewed to the right, and rural was symmetric, and I'll use that in my answer in part A. Then I went to my measures of center. So all of these calculations, center, spread, and even outliers, I got from doing one variable statistics in the calculator. Meaning I went to my calculator, entered into a list and spreadsheet. In column A, I entered urban. So 26, 27, 28, 28, 29, 29, 29, 29, 30, 31, 33, 34, 34, so on. I entered all those numbers, there are 20 of them, in column A of my list and spreadsheet. And I did the same thing in column B, but entered the rural data in one variable, and then I did one variable stats for each. And if you need help reviewing that, how to do a one variable stat, I could show you the steps, I guess. I don't think I have any data in here. But if I were to do a one variable stat, keep number of lists as 1, you'd have something typed in. So I think I labeled my list A, U for urban. So here I picked list U, and then keep frequency list as 1, and keep every other list the same as it is, and then click OK. I don't have data in here. I did it on my handheld. But all of these numbers came from my calculator. Even outliers. I made box plots of each of these. I opened a data statistics page. I made box plots. Neither had outliers. So I used all of this information when I come down to my solution. And my solution's a little extra, and I'll show you that when I go to the scoring key. But I started off, I go in order, shape, center, spread. So in my first sentence, I talked about their shapes. I made sure to put it in context. So the distribution of daily caloric intake, that's in context, of 9th graders in urban areas is skewed to the right, while the sample of 9th graders in rural areas is symmetric. So the skewed right and the symmetric, those are words describing the math. But the daily caloric intake and the fact that it's 9th graders in these two areas, that's me putting it in context. And then I go on. So that's my shape. Check. I got shape. Center. On average, that's me saying center. Rural 9th graders consume more calories daily. I really should have put the units more calories per kilogram of body weight daily. And then I listed the mean for those rural 9th graders. So let me rewind. On average, rural 9th graders consume more calories daily. Here's their mean and median. Then their rural counterparts, and I listed their mean and median. And similar stuff with spread, so you can finish reading that. I'll post this solution also in Classroom. And let's look at the scoring. So here's another problem that scored E, P, and I, where E is the best, P is okay, and I is not good. So here you are scored essentially correct if you can compare shape, center, and spread. And why I was a little bit extra, it tells me specific numerical values are not required. I just kind of listed them all just to cover my behind to make sure I got enough, but it wasn't necessary in this problem to be essentially correct. Scoring, as I go down, so when I score your questions tomorrow morning, you'll get a partially correct if the student correctly compares any two of those three. So maybe just center and shape, or center and spread, and you forget shape. And then you get no points if you compare one or none. All right, so down to part B. So part B of the Unit 1 FRQ was, is it reasonable to generalize the findings of this study to all rural and urban 9th grade students in the United States? Explain. We've talked about this in more than one unit about where you can generalize, and really you can only generalize to the population where that sample came from. So for both of these, because they were from one rural high and one urban high, we really could only generalize to those schools. We can't generalize but beyond those specific schools. And I believe, if I go down to my scoring key, this was sufficient. You get essentially correct if you realize the findings cannot be. So you have to say you cannot generalize to the population. And you somewhere have to mention they only sampled from one rural and one urban high school. And then no P here, that's either E, all or nothing. So if you didn't have those two things, you wouldn't have gotten any points for this question. Now, just to give you an example where this would be a yes, is if, let's say they took samples from rural high schools all over the United States. They randomly selected, 50 rural high schools from the United States and sampled from them, or 50 urban high schools throughout the United States. That would be an instance where you can generalize to the population, but here you can really only generalize to those schools. And then last, part C, they want to conduct a similar study or debating which of the following two plans to use. Plan 1 was they have each student in the study record all the food he or she consumed in one day. Then researchers would compute the number of calories of food consumed per kilogram of body weight for each student for that day. So pretty much what it sounded like this study did. Plan 2 was have each student in the study record all the food he or she consumed over the same 7-day period. So let's say Sunday through Saturday. The researchers would compute the average daily number of calories of food consumed per kilogram of body weight for each student during that 7-day period. So assuming the students keep accurate records, which plan, 1 or 2, would be better to meet the goal of the study? So the goal of this study was to see if students in rural or urban areas consume more calories per per kilogram of body weight. And here, I think it's obvious. I hope everyone picked Plan 2. Because Plan 2, if you think about Plan 1, before I read my response, Plan 1, some kids, if you do one day of the week, some kids may eat nothing that day, hardly anything, like they have a busy day, while other kids, maybe that's their off day and they have tons of time and they eat a lot that day. So you get a lot of variability in your sample. Whereas in Plan 2, if you take these kids and over a 7-day period, average how much they consumed, you reduce that variability and those kind of freakish sample results. We get a more consistent result with Plan 2. So my response was Plan 2 is better because daily caloric intake varies from day to day. Averaging 7 days of intake will reduce the variability to be able to better compare the daily caloric intake per kilogram of body weight among urban and rural 9th graders. And the scoring here, you were essentially correct if 1, you chose Plan 2, and then 2, you gave some sort of correct justification. Partially correct if you say Plan 2, but you give weak statistical justification. So you just for saying Plan 2 is better, you get something. But having good justification gives you that essentially correct versus being partially correct. And then incorrect, obviously, if you do Plan 1, or if you don't provide any justification. So make sure you provide something, some sort of reasoning of why. And they say that in the question, justify your answer.